My name is Emily, and I am 34 years old. I want to tell you a story about how the advice my therapist gave me to let go almost broke me until I realized the path to healing wasn't forgetting the past, but remembering it, validating it, and finally finding peace not despite the pain, but because I acknowledged its truth. If you're listening from somewhere in the world, please drop your location in the comments below. It helps me feel connected knowing where these stories are reaching. If you've ever felt completely misunderstood or betrayed by someone who is supposed to love you unconditionally, please hit the like button on this video. And if you want to hear more stories about navigating difficult family dynamics and finding your own truth, please subscribe to my channel. For years, I carried a weight I couldn't name. It felt like a constant hum of anxiety, a fear of being truly seen, a deep-seated belief that no matter how hard I tried, I would always be too much or not enough. I traced these feelings back to my childhood, specifically to my relationship with my mother. She wasn't a monster in the way you read about in fictional stories. There was no physical abuse, no obvious neglect in terms of providing for basic needs. But the damage she inflicted was insidious, emotional, and it twisted my perception of myself and the world in ways I didn't understand until much later. Growing up, my mother had a way of making everything about her. My achievements were opportunities for her to boast to her friends. My failures were personal embarrassments she wouldn't hesitate to scold me for publicly. Any emotional struggle I had was either dismissed, "Stop being dramatic, other people have it worse," or co-opted, "You think you're stressed? You have no idea what I'm dealing with." I learned early on that my feelings were inconvenient, an obstacle to her carefully constructed image of a perfect family with a perfect, compliant daughter. I became a master of masking, of presenting the version of Emily I thought she wanted to see: quiet, agreeable, high-achieving, and most importantly, undemanding. There was a constant undercurrent of comparison in our home. My older brother, Michael, was the golden child. He could do no wrong. His accomplishments, though few and far between compared to mine, were celebrated with fanfare. His mistakes were excused as youthful indiscretions. My successes were met with a lukewarm nod or a redirection of the conversation back to Michael or herself. "Oh, you got an A? That's nice. Did you hear Michael got a promotion? Or you finished your project early? Good. Can you help me with this?" Michael's too busy. It wasn't just the lack of praise. It was the subtle, persistent message that my worth was inherently less, that my efforts paled in comparison, that my needs were secondary. One memory sticks out, a small thing that felt huge at the time. I was 14, and I'd spent weeks working on a complex art project for school. It was a mixed media piece, something I was genuinely proud of. I remember bringing it home, excited to show my mother. She was on the phone in the kitchen. I waited patiently, holding the fragile piece. When she finally hung up, I held it out. Her eyes scanned it for a moment, then she pursed her lips. "It's interesting," she said, and the way she said interesting made it sound anything but positive. "Are you sure the colors go together? It looks a bit messy." Then she gestured towards a fridge. "Did you remember to defrost the chicken for dinner? Michael will be home soon." The project was never mentioned again. It ended up in the back of my closet. It wasn't the criticism itself, but the instant dismissal, the pivot to someone else's needs, the complete lack of interest in something that had consumed my time and passion. It taught me that my creative expression, a part of my inner world, was not safe to share with her. As I got older, her control tactics became more sophisticated. She was a master of guilt trips and passive aggression. If I made plans with friends, she'd sigh dramatically and say something like, "Oh, going out again? I just thought. Well, never mind. It's fine. I'll just have a quiet night in." Alone, if I didn't respond to a text immediately, she'd call hours later, her voice laced with manufactured concern. I was so worried. I thought something terrible had happened. "Why didn't you answer?" I was imagining the worst. This constant emotional manipulation created a tight knot of anxiety in my stomach every time her name flashed up on my phone screen. I felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells, trying to anticipate her moods and needs to avoid triggering a negative reaction. The central betrayal, the The one that eventually led me to therapy happened a few years ago, just after my 30th birthday. I had been saving up for a down payment on a small apartment for years, sacrificing nights out, vacations, everything. I had a substantial amount put away, enough that I felt I was finally nearing my goal. I was excited, sharing my progress with my parents. My mother seemed happy for me, enthusiastic even. She started talking about how wonderful it would be for me to have my own space, how proud she was. For a brief, shining moment, I felt seen and supported. Then her tone shifted. It was subtle at first. She started mentioning how tight money was for her and my father, how the house needed repairs they couldn't afford, how stressful everything was. These were brief mentions, interspersed with the apartment talk, so I didn't immediately connect them. Then came the request. It wasn't a direct ask for money for her. It was for Michael. He had apparently gotten into some significant debt. He needed a large sum urgently, or there would be serious consequences, she said, vague but urgent. She painted a picture of him in despair, facing ruin. She looked at me with those wide, pleading eyes that always made me feel like the most selfish person on earth if I didn't immediately capitulate to whatever she wanted. He just needs a loan, Emily, she said, her voice soft and urgent. Just enough to tide him over. Your father and we just don't have it right now. You have your savings. You're doing so well. He'll pay you back, of course, as soon as he's back on his feet. It would mean the world to him. It would save him. She emphasized the word save. It was framed as a temporary helping hand to my struggling brother, a noble act of familial love. The amount she asked for was substantial, nearly 2/3 of my carefully saved down payment. I hesitated. This was years of work, years of denial. This was my freedom, my independence, within reach. But Michael was my brother. And my mother was painting a picture of absolute desperation, a family crisis. Plus, there was the implicit message, the one I'd internalized since childhood. Good daughters help their family, especially their struggling siblings. Good daughters prioritize family needs above their own. And above all, good daughters make their mothers happy. I remembered the times Michael had been there for me, smaller ways maybe, but he was my brother. I remembered my mother's disappointed face when I didn't meet her expectations. I remembered the fleeting warmth I'd felt when she seemed proud of my apartment goal. The cocktail of familial duty, guilt, and the desperate hope for her approval was potent. I agreed. She was effusive in her thanks. Oh, Emily, you're such a good sister. Such a good daughter. I knew I could count on you. Her praise felt warm, a rare and precious commodity. Michael called me later, his voice sounding suitably stressed but grateful. He promised to set up a payment plan as soon as possible. I felt a pang of regret about my savings, but it was mingled with a sense of having done the right thing, of being a good family member, of finally earning some genuine appreciation from my mother. Weeks turned into months. There was no word about the payment plan. I was hesitant to ask. My mother had warned me not to make Michael feel guilty, to give him space. When I finally gently broached the subject with Michael, he was vague. Yeah, sorry, things are still tough. I'll get to it. When I mentioned it to my mother, she became defensive. He's going through a lot, Emily. You can't pressure him. You have your job, you're fine. He's really struggling. The narrative had shifted from a temporary loan to an open-ended, need-based handout, framed as my responsibility to my struggling brother. My mother had effectively turned my act of generosity into an obligation she now enforced. The real kicker came about 6 months later. I was visiting my parents' house, and I overheard my mother talking on the phone to her sister. She was complaining about the cost of a family vacation they were planning. And then I heard her say, yes, well, luckily Emily was able to help out Michael, which freed up some of our funds for this trip. She's so good about helping her family, you know. My blood ran cold. Our funds? She had reframed the money I had loaned Michael, money I desperately needed for my own future, as money that had somehow benefited her and my father, money that allowed them to take a vacation. The loan to Michael, I later pieced together, wasn't just for his debt. A significant portion had gone towards alleviating their financial strain, which had then enabled their discretionary spending on a trip. Michael's debt was real, yes, but the way it was presented to me and the way my money was subsequently used and spoken about was a deliberate misrepresentation, a manipulation to get me to part with my savings for their indirect benefit, all under the guise of helping my brother. I confronted her. It was the first time I truly stood my ground, fueled by a white-hot mix of hurt, anger, and profound disillusionment. I told her what I'd heard, what I suspected, how betrayed I felt. Her reaction was swift and textbook. Denial. Outrage that I would even suggest such a thing. How could you accuse me of that, Emily? After everything I've done for you? Then deflection. Michael needed that money. Your father and I sacrificed so much. And here you are, complaining about helping your own family. Then gaslighting. You're imagining things. You heard incorrectly. I said no such thing. Why are you always so dramatic? You need to learn to be less sensitive. She twisted my pain into a character flaw, my confrontation into an ungrateful attack. She never acknowledged the truth, never apologized, never showed an ounce of remorse for manipulating me out of my savings under false pretenses. I left their house that day trembling, not just from anger, but from a deep, aching confirmation of a fear I'd carried my whole life, that my mother's love and approval were conditional, transactional, and that she was capable of using me for her own ends without a second thought, and then lying about it. This is when I started therapy. The loan situation was the catalyst, but the therapy quickly unearthed decades of suppressed feelings, the constant criticism, the comparisons to Michael, the emotional invalidation, the feeling of never being good enough. I poured out my story, describing the incidents, the feelings, the constant anxiety. I spoke about the loan, the betrayal, the confrontation, her reaction. My therapist, a kind, older woman, listened patiently, and her initial advice, given with the best of intentions, was to let go. She talked about forgiveness, about not letting the past control my present, about moving on for my own peace. She explained that I couldn't change my mother, that I had to accept her limitations and release the anger. This is standard, often good, advice for dealing with difficult people. But for me, in that moment, it felt like being told to bury the truth again. I tried. I really did. I meditated, I journaled, I repeated affirmations about peace and acceptance. I tried to push the memories of the loan, the conversation I overheard, the years of subtle pain down. I told myself, just let it go, Emily. It happened. You can't change it. Focus on the future. But it didn't work. Trying to let go felt like trying to heal a broken bone by pretending it wasn't broken. The pain didn't disappear. It festered beneath the surface. The more I tried to suppress the memories, the more they haunted me. I felt like I was denying my own reality, invalidating my own experience, just as my mother always had. It felt like forgiving her wasn't an act of liberation, but an act of complicity, an agreement to pretend the betrayal hadn't happened, or wasn't as bad as it felt. The therapist's advice, while well-meant, inadvertently replicated the dynamic I was trying to escape. My mother wanted me to let go of my feelings about the betrayal, to stop dwelling on it, to act like everything was fine, essentially, to deny the reality of her actions for her comfort. Now, a trusted professional was telling me something similar, albeit for my own well-being. But the effect was the same. Suppress the truth, ignore the pain, prioritize external peace, or the appearance of peace, over internal validation. I became increasingly distressed. I felt like a failure at therapy. Why couldn't I just let it go? Was I really just too sensitive, too dramatic, as my mother claimed? Was I holding on to anger unnecessarily? I started doubting my own perceptions again, falling back into the familiar pattern of self-blame that had been ingrained in me since childhood. One particularly low evening, feeling completely lost and overwhelmed by the pressure to let go, I pulled out some old boxes from my closet. I was looking for something unrelated, but I stumbled upon mementos from my teenage years, old diaries, school reports, photos. And I found that art project. The messy, colorful mixed media piece I'd been so proud of at 14, the one my mother had dismissed so easily. Holding it, a wave of emotion washed over me. It wasn't just sadness about the art project itself, but a flood of memories tied to it. The excitement I felt creating it, the hope of sharing it, the crushing disappointment of her reaction, the feeling of my creativity being something inconvenient or unimpressive. And that memory wasn't isolated. It connected to other memories. The time she forgot to come to my school play, the time she openly favored Michael in an argument where I was clearly right, the countless subtle put-downs masked as jokes. As I sat there, surrounded by these physical echoes of my past, I had a realization. The problem wasn't that I couldn't let go. The problem was that I shouldn't let go of the truth of what happened. Trying to forget the specific incidents, the specific words, the specific feeling of those moments was trying to erase the evidence of the emotional reality I had lived. My pain wasn't because I was holding on to the past, it was because the past was real, and trying to deny its impact felt like trying to deny a part of myself. I realized that letting go in the way my therapist had suggested, and in the way my mother wanted, meant releasing the claim to the truth of my experience. It meant saying, it wasn't that bad, or it didn't affect me that much, or she didn't mean it, when in fact, it was that bad. It did affect me profoundly, and whether she meant it or not, though I suspected she did in her own twisted way, the impact was undeniable. The peace I craved wasn't going to come from forgetting the past, but from remembering it clearly, validating my own feelings about it, and integrating it into my understanding of who I was and why I had the struggles I did. Remembering wasn't dwelling, it was acknowledging. Remembering wasn't being stuck, it was building a solid foundation of truth upon which to stand. I went back to my therapist and I told her about my realization. I explained that trying to let go felt like gaslighting myself, like adopting my mother's narrative that my pain wasn't real or wasn't important. I told her I needed to understand my past, to validate my hurt, to remember the specific instances of betrayal and manipulation, not to punish my mother, but to understand the source of my own patterns and fears. To her credit, my therapist was receptive. She adjusted her approach. We stopped focusing solely on techniques to release feelings and started focusing on understanding the dynamics, validating my experiences, and exploring the impact of narcissistic traits and emotional manipulation within families. We delved into specific memories, naming the emotions, connecting the past incidents to my present-day anxieties and difficulties in relationships. It was painful work. Remembering wasn't a gentle process. It brought up the hurt, the anger, the sadness, the confusion all over again. But this time I wasn't trying to push it away. I was examining it. I was saying, yes, this happened. Yes, it hurt. Yes, it was wrong, and in that acknowledgement, there was a strange kind of power. I was reclaiming my story from the narrative my mother had tried to impose. The loan situation, for example, wasn't just about the money. It was about the trust broken, the deliberate deception, the way my financial independence was viewed not as my achievement, but as a resource for her to tap into and redirect for her own comfort or image. Remembering the overheard conversation, remembering her specific words of denial and gaslighting during the confrontation, it wasn't about clinging to anger. It was about reinforcing the truth of what happened, so I wouldn't doubt myself when she inevitably tried to rewrite history. This process of active, conscious remembering and validation became my path to healing. It wasn't about holding on to resentment forever, but about integrating the reality of my past into my understanding of myself. It allowed me to see the patterns, to understand why I had certain triggers, why I struggled with boundaries, why I often felt unworthy. It wasn't my fault. These were learned responses to a difficult and often toxic environment. With this newfound clarity and self-validation, my relationship with my mother had to change. I couldn't continue pretending everything was normal, that the betrayal hadn't happened, that her manipulative behavior was acceptable. Remembering the truth gave me the strength to set boundaries, something I had never been able to do effectively before. The first boundary was about the money. I finally directly told Michael that I needed a repayment plan and that I would not be treated as an unlimited source of funds. This caused friction, of course. My mother intervened, accusing me of being cruel and selfish. But remembering the truth, that I had been manipulated, that this money was my future, gave me the resolve to stand firm. I told her, calmly but firmly, that I was not discussing my finances with her or Michael anymore, that it was between him and me, and that her attempts to intervene were inappropriate. She reacted with anger, with tears, with accusations, but I didn't back down. I ended the conversation when she became abusive. Setting boundaries with a parent who has never respected them is incredibly difficult. It feels counterintuitive, like you're being disrespectful or unkind. But I was remembering all the times my boundaries had been violated, all the times I had sacrificed my own well-being for the sake of a fragile peace that was never truly peaceful anyway. This remembering fueled my determination. I limited contact. I stopped sharing personal information with my mother because remembering past conversations showed me how she would twist my words or use my vulnerabilities against me. I learned to say no, without over-explaining or apologizing. Each boundary I set, each time I chose to honor my own needs and feelings based on the reality of my past experiences, felt like a small act of rebellion, a reclamation of my own life. My mother did not take this well. She escalated her behavior. She complained about me to other family members, painting me as cold, ungrateful, and selfish for setting boundaries and expecting the money back. She distorted the truth of the loan situation, telling relatives that I was harassing poor Michael for a small amount of money I had generously offered him, not mentioning her involvement or the amount or her vacation. She tried to rally flying monkeys, people who would pressure me to fall back in line. It was painful to hear the distorted narratives she was spreading, to know that people I cared about might be seeing me through her lens of lies and manipulation. But remembering helped here too. Remembering the specific incidents, the specific lies, the specific manipulations she had employed against me directly gave me clarity. I knew her playbook. I could see her tactics for what they were. This knowledge didn't make the pain of being misunderstood disappear, but it grounded me. It allowed me to think, this is her pattern. This is what she does when she loses control. This isn't about me. It's about her inability to cope with my independence and boundaries. I didn't engage with the flying monkeys directly about the specifics of the loan unless absolutely necessary, and even then, I kept it brief and factual, careful not to get pulled into the emotional drama my mother thrived on. My focus was on protecting my peace, not winning a public relations battle orchestrated by my mother. Some family members understood, seeing through her performance. Others fully bought into her story, reinforcing the painful reality that some relationships might be permanently damaged by her actions and my necessary response. Michael eventually started paying me back, slowly. Our relationship is strained. He is still very much under my mother's influence, and he seems unable or unwilling to acknowledge the full truth of what happened or her role in it. We talk, but there's a distance. It's not the close relationship I once hoped for, but it's a relationship built on a clearer, albeit painful, reality, rather than a facade. My relationship with my mother is now minimal. We have occasional, superficial contact. I maintain strict boundaries about what we discuss and how she speaks to me. If she starts with the passive aggression, the guilt trips, or the attempts at manipulation, I end the conversation. It's not a relationship of warmth or deep connection, and perhaps it never will be. That's a source of sadness, a grief for the mother I wished I had. But remembering the truth of who she is and how she behaved allows me to accept this reality without blaming myself. I am no longer chasing her approval or trying to force a connection that isn't genuinely there. The peace I found wasn't in some abstract concept of letting go that required me to suppress my history. It was in the concrete act of remembering, acknowledging, and validating my own experiences. It was in understanding the patterns of manipulation and betrayal that had shaped my early life. This understanding gave me the power to stop repeating those patterns, to stop seeking validation from someone incapable of giving it genuinely, and to finally give that validation to myself. Remembering allowed me to grieve the loss of the relationship I thought I had, or wished I had. It allowed me to process the anger and the hurt without letting it consume me. It allowed me to forgive myself for not seeing the manipulation sooner, for believing the lies, for trying so hard to be the daughter I thought she wanted. I forgave myself for not being able to let go when others told me to, recognizing that my inability wasn't a failure, but a sign that my intuition was telling me the truth needed to be faced first. The phrase, let go, implies forgetting, moving past without fully processing. For me, healing required the opposite. It required sitting with the discomfort, examining the wounds, tracing the scars back to their source. It required saying, yes, this happened. This was real, and my feelings about it are valid. My peace didn't come from releasing the memory of the past, but from releasing the power the past held over me. By remembering the truth, I took away the power of the lies and the manipulation. I built resilience not on forgetting, but on understanding. I built self-worth not on external approval, but on internal validation. So, if you are in a similar situation, being told to just let go of painful experiences with family and it feels wrong, trust that feeling. Maybe your path to peace isn't through forgetting, but through remembering. Remembering the truth of what happened, validating your own pain and experience, and using that truth as the foundation for setting boundaries and reclaiming your own life. It is a difficult journey, but it is one that leads to a deeper, more authentic peace than denial ever could. My mother and I will likely never have a conventionally close relationship. The trust is broken, and some things cannot be fully repaired. But I have found a different kind of peace. A peace that comes from knowing my own truth, honoring my own worth, and protecting my own well-being. The debt is being paid back, slowly. The apartment goal is back on track. But more importantly, I am building a life free from the constant anxiety and self-doubt that defined my earlier years. Remembering gave me that freedom. Thank you for listening to my story. It took a lot to share this, and I hope that by sharing my experience, it might resonate with some of you out there who are struggling with similar family dynamics. What are your thoughts on the idea of letting go versus remembering when it comes to healing from painful past experiences? Have you found that acknowledging the truth of a difficult situation was necessary before you could move forward? Share your experiences in the comments below. Reading your stories helps us all feel less alone. If my story resonated with you on any level, please hit that like button. It helps support the channel and lets me know this content is valuable. And if you want to hear more stories about navigating complex relationships, standing up for yourself, and finding healing after difficult experiences, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss my next video. Thank you again for your time and your presence. Remember to trust your own truth and to speak it, even when it's difficult.